Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out the range to talk about some of the craziness we've seen with the evolution of the AR-15. Now, the AR-15, when it was originally conceived, was intended to be this super lightweight rifle. And in the age of the M1 Garand and later the M14, the AR-15/M16 certainly was a lightweight alternative. Lower recoiling, much higher ammunition count that you could carry on your person for the same weight as if you were carrying something like a 30-06 or a 308. And yeah, just very manageable recoil, lightweight, all that good stuff. It made for America's longest serving infantry rifle. But even despite the fact when it was introduced, this is an SP1, a very early production AR-15, the original rifle was popular, but not as popular as it is today, and has become America's most loved and longest serving primary issued infantry rifle. Of course, it's gone through a number of different iterations over the years, but we're still using it is the point. But in the commercial space, and even to a degree in the military space, these rifles went from super lightweight, 6.5 poundish type firearms to where they started strapping on accessories and changing the basic operating principles to where they got up to almost as being as heavy as an M14. But then we start to see that in today, in 2025, dialing back to being more along the lines of the original, that being lightweight. So today we just want to document some of those crazy changes and some of the things that were done, and ultimately how we wound up back here, kind of where we started with a few exceptions, some improvements that were needed. Let's get started. A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below. The AR-15 is a fantastic rifle. I absolutely love the rifle, and it's definitely either my favorite or among my favorites in the top 1 or 2 place, just because it is lightweight, accurate, reliable, just everything you would want in a modern rifle. And so, yes, the rifle has evolved over the years. And again, as I said in the opening of the video, it's taken some really weird paths, all to kind of come back to where it all started. So let's take a look at where it all started. So the AR-15 was originally a rifle that was to get rid of steel and wood, both very heavy materials. So they traded the steel for aluminum and the wood for polymers. And this did bring the weight of the rifle down. That coupled with a very lightweight profile barrel. Get this delta ring or the slip ring off here. And you can kind of see, let me show you guys, it's empty. But you can see this lightweight barrel. And despite the fact that it has this, what some would refer to as a pencil barrel, it's still a surprisingly accurate rifle with high quality ammunition. Now the recoil and everything is super lightweight. The maintenance is super easy to do. You just pop a pin in the rear, hinge it open, pull out your bolt and carrier. You can easily strip it down and clean it. So it was just this really, really easy rifle to maintain and extremely pleasant to shoot. When you coupled this with the military's requirement for select fire, being able to go to full auto, it was extremely controllable. And even in that realm, because of its lightweight and extra ammunition capacity, you know, you could carry quite a bit of ammo to feed the thing. But, you know, in the civilian world, full auto isn't so much of a thing, even when it was, you know, still legal before 1986. Most people just bought semi-automatics. They didn't want to go to the hassle of all the paperwork and stuff that was required to own an NFA item, even back when they were commonly available. Oh my gosh, these old slip rings are so tough to get your hands on because they're flat. They don't have that taper to them, but it can be done. The really defining feature of the rifle, though, is what most people call direct gas impingement. Now, technically, it's not. If you look at the original patents, this is technically an internal piston rifle. Instead of having the piston arm coming all the way out here and tapping gas off and acting upon the piston out here by the front sight block, like an AK or something like that, or even a short stroke gas piston like the FAL, this diverts gas back into the chamber area. And then right here, the gas is tapped off, goes down into the bolt carrier. The bolt itself has 3 piston rings on it. It's a piston. And then when the gas gets in there, it expands and springs the bolt and carrier away from the chamber, putting the recoil directly in line with the shooter's shoulder. Now, when you have a gas piston rifle, usually it acts upon a higher point of the carrier, and there'll be a fulcrum, a natural tilt point somewhere in the design, which when it wants to tilt, even though if it's not doing it, it still imparts that movement. It can cause the recoil to increase. The DI, or the internal piston system of this rifle, puts that recoil directly in line with the shooter's shoulder, making it very controllable both in semi and fully automatic modes. So that's where we started. Lightweight, very controllable, a decent cartridge. A 5.56 wound up being a very effective cartridge. But what did they change and why? So let's take a look. So one of the first things I recall people attacking the AR-15 M16 for was its poodle killing cartridge. What does that mean? Well, people were saying that the 5.56 was a poodle killer, meaning small dog, right? They were claiming it was not an effective man stopper. And so their early criticisms of the rifle were cheap plastic and a poodle killer cartridge. Well, it turns out the 5.56 isn't just for poodles anymore. It's actually quite effective for battlefield use, so much so the entirety of NATO now has converted to 5.56 as their primary infantry rifle cartridge. So it is a fine cartridge, but there was a lot of pressure in the United States because we do have this mentality of bigger is better. We like big V8 engines. We like big trucks that, are just massive in size. Americans like big. And so the 5.56 wasn't cutting it for some folks in their opinions. And so out of that concern sprang cartridges like the 6.8. And this is the 6.8 SPC, which would evolve into the SPC2. And this originated, if I'm not mistaken, out of a government contract. And the government was looking for something that hit harder than the 5.56, but because we had invested so heavily in the 5.56 and the AR-15 M16, well, they wanted it to fit in a standard size rifle and a standard size magazine. So here you have the 6.8, and this is not to be confused with the new 6.8x51. That's a completely different animal. We're not talking about that in today's video. But the 6.8 SPC pops right into standard 5.56 magazine, and on top of it, I just stuck a regular 5.56 round. So you can see it works in the same magazine. And so the fire controls, magazines, although this magazine wouldn't be an ideal choice. You do want to use a 6.8 specific magazine, but it fits into the standard magwell, which you see here. And this is a purpose-made 6.8 magazine, but I have them all the way up to 30 rounds in length. And this was manufactured by Barrett. And again, this was being considered for military service. Back in the day, Mac from the Discovery show called Future Weapons talked extensively about this rifle, did a great episode on it, talking about the ballistics and all that stuff. So this is where we're going. So this rifle changed the cartridge because of all the concerns about the inadequacies of the 5.56. And then it also, you'll notice, because this is kind of the version that the government was considering, it has this big arms rail system on it. Guys, this thing is a tank. And just look at all the metal in this handguard. And for what? You can mount 1913 rail panels along the side. You got all this massive hunks of aluminum up here. It comes all the way back to a sleeve that rides over the top rail. Puts this flip-up sight back here. And of course, we have a special gas block on this particular model with the flip-up sight in the front. But it just added a ton of weight. Now, this one is a direct gas impingement or internal piston design, but later versions of this would use a piston system. So, yeah, this was an example of the rifle going from a lightweight cartridge and a lightweight rifle with a lightweight cartridge to a much heavier rifle, now approaching the weight of the M14 and shooting a heavier cartridge that is 6.8 in diameter. So did this take off? Well, no, the government didn't do anything with it, and it just kind of petered out and died. But during this era of the early 2000s, we did see people trying all sorts of different things with the AR-15 to try to modernize it. But were they making improvements? Would you consider this to be an improvement? I certainly don't. I don't think the 6.8 is necessary for an infantry rifle for the purpose of this M16 AR-15 as it was used in the U.S. military. Yes, I understand the need for larger cartridges for precision shooting or special operations, but as a standard issue infantry rifle, I don't really see a problem with the 5.56. So this kind of fizzled out, and probably rightfully so. So let's take a look at the next rifle in the lineup. Now, remember me talking about the direct gas impingement / internal piston. I'll just call it DI going forward for the sake of brevity. But you remember me talking about DI. And it was one of those things early on that people didn't care for. People that were critical of the AR-15 or M16, they said, well, it poops where it eats, meaning it diverts gas back into the action of the rifle, and it's pooping where it eats. Now, I've argued for decades that it's actually an ingenious system. If you are a machinist or you work with small machines, things like that, graphite, carbon, is actually a dry lubricant. And that's, I think, what Eugene Stoner was going for. The rifles that I demonstrated right here on the Military Arms channel run impeccably well, completely bone dry, just using the carbon as the lubricant. The BCM test that we're almost to 10,000 rounds on, yeah, that's a DI rifle that hasn't seen a drop of oil in almost 10,000 rounds. So I didn't really see a problem with it, but that didn't stop the brain trust of all the folks out there saying, nope, it poops where it eats, we got to fix that. And so they took what really is a defining feature of the M16 or AR-15, which being that inline recoil system, and slapped pistons in them and caused all sorts of new problems. Carrier tilt, increased recoil, shorter parts longevity. It just made a whole mess, but that didn't slow people down. They wanted to get a piston because it was much better. So this is an old Wyndham weaponry, M4 forgery, I should say, and it was originally a DI rifle. But along came a company called Osprey and many others that were drop-in solutions to improve the reliability of your rifle so it could do over the beach or whatever else marketing they could come up with. And what was it? Well, essentially, you just take your DI system out of the rifle, just basically take your gas tube out and drop these parts in. Didn't require a whole lot of special knowledge or special tools outside of a punch, really. And boom, you had a short stroke gas piston rifle. That's what we have in here. Let's take a look. Here is the Osprey system. I'm going to go ahead and open the bolt here really quick just so I can show you how the system works. So again, this forward piece just pins in using the exact same hole with a roll pin, pins into your gas block. Okay, so this becomes the expansion chamber where gas is tapped off into here. And then you'll notice it's kind of flat shaped. That's so it will fit under a mostly standard handguard. Now, you did have to find handguards like this Midwest Industry that would work with this system. This wasn't built for it, but it did work with it, so that's why it's on the rifle. Standard M4 type handguards generally wouldn't work without modification with this system. But it would work with some aftermarket handguards on the market, like this Midwest system. But what it does is it gives you this expansion chamber, and then this is your piston. And so the gas pushes on this piston. The piston rod extends into the chamber area, the receiver area. Let me open it up here. And then you just slap in the Osprey carrier, which has this little tappet up here instead of the direct gas impingement gas key. And the short stroke piston just taps it here and sends it rearward. What's carrier tilt? Well, I'm glad you asked. Carrier tilt was when you tap it here, the fulcrum is going to be right around here. That's the pivot, natural pivot point. And so when the piston would hit it here, it would tilt on that fulcrum. And that's why you see this bevel on the rear here, because it would tilt down and hit potentially the lower receiver and cause reliability issues and parts breakage and all sorts of stuff. So carrier tilt was one of those things they were struggling with back in the day. They eventually resolved it, but it was a real problem because they were changing the basic recipe of Eugene Stoner's design. But once again, I think the company website for Osprey is still out there, but I don't think they're producing anything. People just lost interest in these types of kits. Now, we've tested this and we found it to be really kind of interesting and cool and fun to use. Oh, there we go. I'm like, why are you not going close? Because my pin's halfway across. But yeah, they just kind of petered out. Nobody really saw the benefit in them. If I recall, there were some issues that arose with them and they just kind of fell off. Now, this didn't add a whole lot of weight to the gun, but it did, again, change the basic core functioning principles of the AR-15 and not in a positive way, in my opinion. Others would disagree and think this was a superior system. Me, just a fan of DI. In all of the imagined shortcomings of the AR-15, people were just coming up with solution upon solution upon solution for these, in my opinion, mostly imaginary problems. Now, one of the criticisms of the AR-15 has always been its buffer tube. And this is where the recoil system of the rifle operates. Even on earlier rifles that have non-collapsible stocks, there's a buffer tube inside of there that concealed within that stock that allows that recoil system to function. And people thought, well, there's no real way outside of just collapsing the stock on something like the M4 to really shorten it quite a bit, because this is quite a bit of length back here, even when it's completely collapsed, you still got 7-8 inches of stock back here, and people wanted a folding stock for storage. And there were solutions out there for folding stocks, but you had to drastically modify the internal components of your rifle to where the entire recoil assembly and bolt and carrier all rode within the receiver. Therefore, you could then not worry about the buffer tube or stock and put something folding on there. And those have met with marginal success. In my experience, they're nowhere near as reliable as just a standard DI AR15. But Ruger had another idea, as did other companies. Let's not fold the stock and mess with the internals that much. Let's go with what was then a proven idea, the gas piston, short stroke gas piston. And let's make the barrel removable and make a takedown rifle, and that's what this is. So, no folding stock. You lock the bolt to the rear. You have a clasp out here on the end of your handguard holding your barrel in. Not receiver mounted, out on the end of your extruded aluminum handguard with key mod. Another, attempt at modularity that ultimately evolved into M-lock. So you pull back on this once your bolt's locked to the rear and rotate your barrel, and look at that, you can remove it. And what does that do? Well, if you take a look about where this barrel sticks out, you got a good 6 inches or so of barrel sticking out. And to get rid of those 6 inches to make it even shorter and fit into a small bag, you can then remove your barrel. Then you can remove your upper from the lower. And now you have a small compact rifle that fit into a pretty small backpack. Now people would say, but you can just unpin the upper from the lower and you get the exact same results. No, you won't get the exact same results. Here you can see the lower, the upper next to it. And then if I put the barrel in it, look how much longer that is. When I take the barrel out, look how much shorter that is. So yeah, that's an awful lot to save, 6 inches or so of real estate, but that's where we were in trying to shorten the AR-15. I don't think the market responded all that well to it either. And so this kind of fizzled out and died. Now, what's interesting though, is that the gas piston idea became so popular that companies that swore up and down they would never convert their DI rifles into gas piston rifles, or people that make gas piston rifles wouldn't convert them into DI, that, well, look at this, okay? Colt, for example, known for its DI rifles, swore to me years ago at SHOT Show they had no interest in piston guns. And they made a piston gun. And then LWRC, who was known for their piston guns, that was their entire brand according to them. They were right at the time. When I had conversations with them years ago, we will never make a DI gun. There's just no point to it. Our brand is short stroke gas pistons. Yeah. Let's take a look at the next rifle. So the last rifle I want to show you guys, and again, guys, this is not a comprehensive list of all the crazy things people have attempted with the AR-15, but this is just some of the more notable changes and ideas that people had that I want to cover off in today's video. So in front of me, I have an LWRC. Again, a company that was built, its entire brand, had built its entire brand around being a gas piston AR-15 because that was popular back in those days. And I remember vividly being told they had zero interest in direct gas impingement. And here we are in 2025 at Copper, our store. We sell LWRC, and we sell a lot more of the DI guns. And why is that? Well, DI is back in vogue. People have realized that DI actually has benefits, lower recoil, and it, yes, self-lubricating, if you will, if you're not averse to a little bit of carbon in your chamber. And what's kind of funny is I see people complaining about it poops where it eats, and then they go on and on about roller delay systems and how great they are. And those are infinitely dirtier than even a DI gun like the rifle in front of us. But I digress. LWRC brought out their DI rifles several years ago so they could be more competitive. Now, their piston rifles are over $2,000. I mean, you can easily get up into $2,200, $2,500 with one of their classic piston rifles. But they introduced their DI rifle, and it's literally $1,000+ less expensive than their piston offerings. Now, Jason and I were talking about just before we filmed this scene, like, what do they really save? Is the gas block changes really $1,000? Is the tappet versus the gas key really less expensive? In my mind, a tappet's a heck of a lot easier to manufacture than a gas key that literally has a hole running through the center of it that turns at an angle inside. Is it really that? Or were they just using the DI to go after a new market? Because it was a Gucci brand, if you will, known for its high prices and high quality. But they were trying to target a different consumer, somebody that's a little bit more budget conscious, that doesn't want to spend $2,500, would be more inclined to spend $1,500. And that's where the DI rifle comes from. So I think it was an effort to get their prices down, which perhaps were artificially high with their piston guns. Don't know that for a fact, but also brings DI to the market because their piston guns weren't selling as well. They're selling more of these in our experience than they are their piston guns by a good margin. So we're back, folks. So here we have an LWRC DI rifle. And if you crack this baby open, take a look inside. There's the gas key. Now you'll notice a little bit different. This gas key is multi-part and has a pin through the back of it here. And it's not bolted down to the top of the carrier. It looks like they literally took one of their piston carriers and just modified it to accept a gas key. So is that really cheaper than just continuing on with a simple tap it? I don't know. And then LWRC has its own receivers and handguards that are kind of blended together here. We have M-LOK. They're kind of known for their barrels, and you can see how they've profiled their barrel here with the cuts to lighten weight, to increase surface area, disperse more heat. But overall, this is a nice lightweight carbine. We've come back to something more like this, just with modern features. Updated handguard that's very rigid, modularity of the handguard with M-LOK versus polymer, very difficult to mount accessories out here, and lightweight, chambered in 5.56. So we went from this all the way around that big circle I showed you today and landed right back here. And what does that mean to me? Well, it means I think I was kind of right all these years. When the entire world was out chasing 40 Smith & Wesson and gas piston ARs, I was back here saying, hey, what about 10 millimeter? It's still a great cartridge, better cartridge, and DI is kind of where it's at. Well, 10 millimeter is back and DI is back. So sometimes us old farts are right about things. And I think we were right about DI. It's actually an outstanding system. And I hope that we find, as long as we're still using gunpowder brass cases and lead bullets, I hope that we see new rifles come out with DI in them, because as we've pointed out in the past, I think it's a softer shooting rifle. I love the SIG Spear, the LT, the 5.56. But I like the CMMG Banshee as well because it's softer shooting. The SIG is a short stroke gas piston. The Banshee is DI. And so, I'm sorry, Descent, not Banshee. They've been through a number of different name changes. And so that's just kind of where I'm at. I love the DI system. I love seeing things like the Descent coming out that are using it. And hopefully other companies follow suit. We'll bring those rifles to your attention if they pop on the market, because I love rifles. If you guys would like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, the best way to do that is become part of our Patreon family. There is a link down below. Also, right here on YouTube, you got the thanks and support button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Mash either one of those buttons. You can help support us on YouTube in the age of demonetization. Please swing by and check out Copper Custom. Thank you for 17 years of support. We'll talk to you guys soon.